All 50 states, President Trump took over 24 hours to publicly respond after an errant ballistic missile warning caused panic across the state of Hawaii. Washington Post describes the steps that led to a state emergency employee sending the false alarm this way, quote, "From a drop-down menu on a computer program, he saw two options, test missile alert and missile alert." He was supposed to choose the former. Big difference. As much of the world now knows, he chose the latter, an initiation of a real-life missile alert. This is what folks in Hawaii saw live on their television as the alert went out.
The U.S. Pacific Command has detected a missile threat to Hawaii. A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. This is not a drill. If you are indoors, stay indoors. If you are outdoors, seek immediate shelter in a building. Remain indoors well away from windows. If you are driving, pull safely to the side of the road and seek shelter in a building or lay on the floor. We will announce when the threat has ended. This is not a drill.
So the way that differs from a test of the emergency broadcast system is basically the lay on the floor and this is not a drill part. For 38 harrowing minutes on a Saturday morning, upwards of 1 million people had reason to believe they might be living out their last moments on the great planet Earth. Finally, a follow-up alert was sent out, making clear there was no threat, but the whole false exercise has left a whole lot of folks wondering and worrying about the possibility of an accidental retaliation someday. We have two gentlemen here to talk about this tonight from Honolulu. Retired four-star U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, a decorated combat veteran of 2 wars and a former member of the National Security Council with vast experience in the Pacific region. And we welcome to our broadcast Daniel Drezner, professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy up at Tufts University. He's the author of several books and most recently has written about the tenure of H.R. McMaster as National Security Advisor. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. And General, I'm going to start with you because, not to lessen this with this phrase, but you had a consumer experience with this, staying at a resort in Hawaii. Take it from there. What happened and mostly what didn't happen?
Yeah, well, you know, it's sort of a shocking occurrence for all of Hawaii. It was just a boneheaded error by one person with a bad system. And by the way, Brian, there was no backup supporting systems in place, as far as I could tell. The hotels really didn't make announcements for 40 minutes. Then they weren't in Japanese. So we got a problem out here. But the larger issue is civil defense isn't the answer if the North Korean fire an ICBM with a 250 kiloton thermonuclear device that goes off in a low-level explosion over the city. So we got to talk about layering enhanced ballistic missile defenses. There's no THAAD missiles here. They work. They just tested one, firing a missile from Hawaii back toward Alaska, and they got it. So we got to think about putting in place active defensive measures, without which, you know, the whole notion about taking cover is sort of silly.
So, Daniel, assuming we can do better than telling people to park their cars and lie flat, I know you're of the mind that there were a few bright spots, a few little bit of room for optimism in what happened here. Why is that?
Well, I agree with General McCaffrey that in some ways the interesting thing about this episode was just how easy it was to trigger this false alarm. And I think given that it happened, and I'm obviously extremely sad that it happened, you can argue it was a successful failure in the following sense. First, what strikes me as miraculous is that despite the fact that this alert went out, my understanding is that there was not a single fatality or injury as a result of any kind of panic or reaction to this kind of alert, which, if you think about it, is almost contrary to how we think about these things treated in fiction. You know, if you think the world is going to end, automatically there's this presumption that there's going to be chaos and disorder, and that doesn't appear to be what happened in Hawaii. There was certainly panic, there was certainly fear, but there wasn't any breakdown in social order. The other thing that's the case, I think, is that because the alert was triggered accidentally and then it took forever, or what seemed like forever in terms of 40 minutes to reverse it, now you have the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency figuring out, A, what went wrong, and B, making sure that this doesn't happen again. So I think this is an instance where, yes, obviously we would have rather this failure not have occurred. But given that it did occur, as General McCaffrey said, what you want to do is harden up the system. You want to make sure this sort of false alarm doesn't get sent again, or if it does get sent, that it can immediately be reversed, which apparently seems to be what HEMA is doing as we speak.
And General, beyond the good points the professor just made, beyond this, this is not a drill. What are the military preps that, as a veteran military man, you look at on behalf of the citizenry and the safety of the people of Hawaii and elsewhere?
Well, Brian, we ought to remind ourselves the North Koreans have tested an ICBM with a range adequate to hit all the continental United States already. They have tested a thermonuclear device that worked. It may have been in excess of 200 kilotons. Within a fairly short period of time, 2 to 5 years, they'll have a dozen ICBMs that can target New York City, D.C., L.A. This is not a Hawaii problem. I suspect that where we're going to be in a very short period of time is looking at the capability of launching a U.S. nuclear strike on North Korea when we have warning that their attack might be imminent. No president's going to risk having 5 million Americans killed, or 5 million Japanese or South Koreans for that matter. So we're edging into some extremely dangerous territory where the only likely outcome is our deterrent policy will be to tell the North Koreans, if we think you're about to launch, we're going to preempt on you, and I think we would do it.
Well, that gets your attention, certainly. And Professor, swinging back to the good news category, it has to be good news, correct me if I'm wrong, that North Korea has literal skin in the game here in the upcoming Olympics, that they're involved and engaged, and it has precipitated talks.
I think that's the case. I mean, you know, as much as there's been a lot of heightened rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, as well as certainly coming from Kim Jong-un about the nuclear standoff, the fact that you now have talks going on between the North and South, the fact that the South Korea will be hosting the Olympics next month, and the fact that North Korea wants to participate suggests that we probably will not have anything, you know, untoward happen at least until March. That said, I am extremely concerned about some of the rhetoric coming from the Trump administration, particularly from National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, in terms of continual talks about the so-called bloody nose strike, some way to somehow sort of launch some kind of strike against North Korea for the fact that it has, you know, engaged in a sort of a reckless expansion of its nuclear program. But the idea that that is somehow going to work strikes me as dangerously ill-informed, and the potential for that to lead to a wider conflagration seems to be much more likely.
Sadly, all we know is we'll have some version of this conversation all over again. For now, General Barry McCaffrey, Professor Daniel Drezner, gentlemen, thank you both very much. On this day, Martin Luther